Hi, and welcome back to Hill and Ponton's VA Disability Blog. I'm Natalia Jofre, our office's COO.
And I'm attorney Rachel Cheek.
We're going to be talking today about sleep apnea, how it affects veterans, how you can have a claim, all sorts of things, all things sleep apnea. So, Rachel, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about what sleep apnea is?
Sure. So, sleep apnea is a condition where during your sleep, you actually stop breathing for a little bit. And what it does is it causes the body to react and it wakes you up a little bit, but not enough so you're fully conscious. You don't usually bolt upright or anything like that, but your body will send messages that you're not getting enough air. And so you will be disturbed from sleep basically, and it prevents you from getting a full night's rest.
I was going to say that sounds very disruptive.
It is. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I'm sure it must mess like with your REM cycle to where you're not getting a true restful sleep, right? If that's
Absolutely.
yeah.
And so I'll tell you a little bit more about sleep apnea, and then we'll kind of get into the symptoms and the negative effects that it has. So there's actually three kinds of sleep apnea. There's obstructive sleep apnea, which is the most common. And so that's when you're sleeping and the tissue in the back of your throat actually blocks your airway.
Wow.
And so that's kind of like a physical cause. So that's obstructive sleep apnea.
Okay.
There's also central sleep apnea. And what that is there's no physical obstruction in your throat, but for whatever reason, your brain doesn't send the right messages to tell you to breathe.
Okay.
And then there's what's called mixed sleep apnea, which is, as it sounds, a combination of the two.
Of both. The worst of both worlds.
Exactly.
Rather than the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the symptoms or how this adversely affects veterans?
Sure. So obviously the symptoms of sleep apnea, like you just, properly guessed, you don't get fully rested. And so some symptoms that you or your spouse or anyone in your house might notice is loud snoring.
Okay.
So I'm not just talking cute little sawing logs, like fully like snort, start, stop breathing, gasping for air.
Wow.
And so as you can imagine, that would lead to daytime sleepiness. And so that can happen even if you have been in bed for 8 hours and as far as you know, you've been asleep the whole time. Because as I mentioned, with sleep apnea, your body sort of wakes itself up just enough to continue to breathe. And so you're right, you don't get a full REM cycle in. And so obviously, the lack of sleep can lead to a lot of issues. It can lead to mental issues like depression. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been, really exhausted and not gotten a good night's sleep. You're not in a good mood the next day.
Yeah.
So imagine that happening every single night.
Day.
Yeah. Not
talking about off the charts irritability.
Absolutely.
Probably anger.
Understandably.
All sorts of yeah, I'd be not in a good mood, obviously, if I never got to a good restful sleep.
Exactly. And it can cause physical health problems as well. So with not getting enough air, it can lead to high blood pressure. It can lead to cardiovascular issues. There's a lot there, more than you would think, just from, maybe if you notice your only symptom is snoring.
Right.
That's not all there is. It can really affect many parts of your body.
Well, and it's, it's funny because all these medical research studies are always coming out and they always talk about how when you sleep, it's when the body basically restores, rejuvenates, and heals itself from a lot of conditions. So I would assume that if you're not ever getting that restful level of sleep, your body probably never has a chance to really recover, right? From anything. Yeah. So why is this important in veterans disability claims?
So it's a pretty common condition as far as just Americans in general, not even veterans. Over 22 million Americans have sleep apnea of some kind. It's very common. And so again, when we tend to think of sleep apnea, the first thing your mind goes to is snoring. And so you might think, okay, well, I snore or my husband or my wife snores. I mean, it's annoying. I'll just go sleep in the other room. Well, again, there's different health effects that can be caused. And so it's important to, if you do notice that you have this condition, to document it and to start kind of thinking about as far as the effects that it may have. So it's not, again, it's not just snoring. It's not getting enough air. So it's you know, affecting your rest. It's affecting your mental health, your physical health.
Mhm.
And so it is a condition that can be claimed and can be service connected, and you can get benefits for.
So when you say document it, what would you recommend in terms of going about doing that?
Mhm. So what needs to be done, first thing is you have to have a diagnosis, and the only way to do that is to get a sleep study,
Mhm.
which they do at the VA. There's obviously different private providers do that. You can't file a claim for sleep apnea without the diagnosed condition.
Mhm.
So you have to have a diagnosis first,
Mhm.
and again, they'll run a sleep study, and they'll be able to kind of I've seen them before. It'll know how many times you wake up during the night. It'll know the consistency of your breathing, and at the end you get a diagnosis.
Okay, and how can this translate into benefits? So in other words, how do you get this service connected?
Mhm. So you need to show that you've got the diagnosis. Now you need to show it's connected to your service.
Mhm.
So the way that there's a few different ways you can go about that. Obviously, the most simple one is if you had sleep apnea while you were in service,
Mhm.
and that should be documented in your treatment records. So that's pretty easy. Look, this started when I was in service. I didn't have sleep apnea beforehand. Boom.
So it doesn't have to, so as long as it existed while you were in service, so in other words, it doesn't have to have been caused by something that occurred in service,
Well,
or more so. So in other words, if you have documentation that you were diagnosed with it while you were in service,
mhm,
or that you were suffering from it while you were in service, that could be sufficient.
could be yes, and as if you didn't have it beforehand.
Mm.
Um,
And you didn't have it beforehand.
right.
Okay.
And so another way you can show that it was caused during service. It can be secondarily service connected to several different conditions. I know some medical conditions that might cause people to gain weight.
Mhm.
That can lead to the obstructive sleep apnea, like you talked about, with kind of the muscles in the throat, the tissue in the throat relaxing.
Mhm.
So it's very common with people. A lot of times, doctors will want to kind of chalk it up to being overweight. That's not all there is. But if you have a condition like that, I have seen where veterans might have orthopedic conditions and they're not
Mhm.
able to exercise, which can lead to weight gain, which can lead to sleep apnea.
Mhm.
Another issue that's connected is PTSD. Now, this is not something that the VA will give you right off the bat. So, if you're service connected for PTSD and you also have sleep apnea,
Mhm.
what you can do is claim service connection for sleep apnea secondary to the PTSD,
Okay.
because there is medical literature showing that it's more common condition in veterans with PTSD, or civilians with PTSD as well.
Mhm.
It has to do with the way that PTSD affects the central nervous system and kind of gives those messages to the body.
Oh.
So again, it's not something that the VA recognizes automatically because you have PTSD and sleep
Right.
apnea. They won't
Mhm.
automatically connect you, but if you can provide a nexus letter from your doctor or medical literature showing that whatever condition you have, in this case PTSD,
Mhm.
can also cause sleep apnea, that's a way to get service connection as
Wow.
well.
So if that's even in your records, that you have one condition and how it correlates to the other, that would be very helpful.
It would be helpful.
Okay. How is it rated?
So it is rated similar to pretty much all disabilities recognized by VA. There are tiers of ratings. So first, again, you have to have the diagnosis. You have to have the service connection, or you have to have the diagnosis. You have to have that it was incurred or caused by service, and then you've got to have that nexus stating that it was incurred or caused by.
Right. Right.
And so that's enough to get you service connected. And then as far as rating goes, the lowest rating is 0.
Mhm.
And so that essentially is when the VA says, okay, yeah, you've got sleep apnea. We think it was caused by your service, but you don't have enough symptoms. You've got the diagnosis and that's it, 0%.
Mhm.
There is a 30% rating tier, which is when you have the diagnosis and you have basically persistent daytime sleepiness, you have trouble staying awake, you feel very fatigued, that can get you a 30% rating. A 50% rating you get when you have the diagnosis and you're required to use or you've been prescribed a breathing machine. So CPAP, that's
Right.
a very common one. The lovely masks that go over your face while you sleep. So that's enough to get a 50% rating. That's, for the most part, about as high as most people can expect to get. There is 100%, which is not common. But that requires you to essentially not be getting any air at all without assistance. And can even, if you need a tracheotomy.
Yeah. Okay. Any common issues with these claims, pursuing these claims or pursuing the benefits as a result of sleep apnea?
So, kind of standard to all claims, there you have to show, how it was connected to service. So, as I mentioned, medical literature is very important. The nexus letter is very important. Like I said, there's literature connecting PTSD with sleep apnea, but it's not necessarily widely accepted by the VA.
Okay.
So, I have definitely seen claims where we'll file for sleep apnea secondary to PTSD, and it gets denied because the VA doesn't recognize it, recognize that connection. So you have to make sure that you have the documentation, the literature to support your claim.
Okay, great. That was a lot of wonderful information. Thanks, Rachel. If you have any other questions or want some additional information, please feel free to visit our website or call our office. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.